having just had my eyes opened to the whole principles behind having a kinship redeemer, of course, I had to take time to read the book of Ruth and delve into it as much as possible. And part of delving in is researching the customs involved. Like, why did she uncover his feet? What does that mean? He offered a shoe. He pulled off a shoe. What does that mean? And of course, Christendom and AI has answers that they offer. They just weren't resonating. I knew it had to be deeper. So the uncovering of his feet. A lot of people say, oh, uncovering the feet, it has to do with this, that. And so meant uncovering his private parts, his lower extremities. No. Because the word used there, that Naomi used, was the same used elsewhere in Daniel, the book of Daniel, when Daniel was describing the arms and legs, the extremities of an angel. And so it was expose his feet. Why? If we recall, and we're familiar with Israelite tradition, they were not supposed to be marrying women from other peoples who worshipped other gods. And for example, in Maccabees, we read about, when they started to rebuild the second temple, and the Israelites were coming in from foreign countries. All those who had taken foreign wives and had foreign children, put them aside. They sent them home. And so it was not culturally appropriate for one such as Ruth, who was a Moabitess, who had different gods, to request that the kinship redeemer be applied to her. Naomi was right to ask her, go back to your family. There's no future for you where I'm going. People aren't going to accept you. But she was faithful. She must have loved her husband who had died, and she obviously loved her mother-in-law. And where her husband who had died could not take care of his mother. If we remember, Yahusha on the cross, one of his last acts was, mother, behold your son. Son, behold your mother. He assigned someone to take on that role of caring for his mother that he would not be able to carry on to fulfill for his mother. So he made arrangements for that. Well, they were in a foreign country, and Ruth's husband couldn't make arrangements for a kinsman, a close friend, or anybody to look after his mother. And so Ruth took that upon herself. And that's why it is said, when Boaz was listing her qualities, her integrity, that she served her mother-in-law and she served the dead. So she was serving her dead husband by taking care of his mother. Those are redeeming qualities. So, because it wouldn't have been appropriate culturally for Naomi to ask, or Ruth to ask, that they be covered by this kinship redeemer. I think it's a Levirate marriage, which wasn't really a marriage. It was just be intimate, beget a child. How does that beget a child? we would ask, for their brother. Like, it's not really of his lineage if somebody else is the father, right? Science has revealed what, of course, our Creator already knew, that if 7 years hadn't passed, her husband's DNA is still swimming around in her blood. And that's why you'll see, like, couples, they get married, they were not, either of them, virgins when they got married, and there'll be two white people, and the woman will give birth to a child who is more melanated, and the father's like, this is not my child, this is not my child, and go get a DNA test. Yes, this is your child. How does this happen? Well, if within the 7 years before the conception of that child, she was with somebody who is more melanated, that DNA could be expressing itself. And so that's why the Levirate begetting of a child for their relative is actual physical, literal, scientific truth. They can do that. And of course our Creator can make sure that that's exactly the DNA that lines up. But notice that Obed, the child that is begotten from that joining together of Ruth and Boaz, is listed as Boaz's son. They honored the practice of the kinsman redeemer. The first one that was born, begotten, went to Naomi. She got to nurse it. So they were respecting the customs while still not being completely in alignment, like literal of it. So now the passing of the shoe, the taking off of the shoe. People say, oh, that's a sign of binding. It's like when you put a shoe, you stand on a piece of land, you're claiming it. No. Again, you have to go back to the culture and ask the people who inherited that culture. Now, I've lived in the desert, so when I read this explanation, I was like, yep, that's the one. So first off, it's mentioned in Yom Kippur as part of the observance of Yom Kippur. So there's a spiritual meaning to this. You take off your shoes and offer them, because what you're saying is, let's not focus here on the material possession, the material wealth that you're going to gain. Can we focus on the soul, on the heart and soul of the matter? You know, this woman, you don't have to claim her. She's a Moabitess. It doesn't apply. And if Naomi was selling land, you would have the first right to buy it, and your children would inherit it. So you could really financially benefit from this, but I'm asking you to consider a higher, more soul-based choice. But also, in the Middle East, it's mostly desert. I've lived in the desert. Everything has thorns. It said everything wants to kill you. I remember the first time I ever saw like a citrus tree, and the size of the thorns on a grapefruit tree. No wonder no white boys want to pick that stuff. You get cut up, and all the thorns have a little bit of poison or toxin or irritant or something like that to keep animals from taking what few leaves that they grow. So taking off your shoes means, like, you put your shoes on if you're going to travel, if you're going to do any hard physical labor, if you're going to fight. You want shoes on. You don't want bare feet. grinding your feet in with all the thorns and the sharp rocks. No. So to take off one's shoes is to make oneself vulnerable to the other person, like subjecting yourself to them and showing that you don't plan on fighting. You don't plan on running either. So you're standing firm in this. You're very, very firm in this, but you want to do this peacefully. And you are admitting that the other person has the upper hand. But could you please take this into consideration? And so that means he really was in love with Ruth. I don't know. I love a good story. I like the idea that love still exists in our world. That's a beautiful thing. And then as I'm reflecting on all of this, an understanding, a perspective comes whispering in. And I'm just like, whoa boy. Like the Game of Thrones, the Red Wedding, where everybody's invited in for the feast. And then they're all cut down. That's like an overture of friendship, and then guess what? Now this is why Yahusha especially warned, do not take the prominent seat. In scripture we read, after the destruction of the second temple, our Creator said specifically, anybody who sacrifices in His name, makes a blood sacrifice, kills an animal, and makes an offering to Him, it is an abomination before Him. When we go through Israelite history, there was a ruler, a king, who was, Jezebel's husband, and our Creator said, I'm not going to take the throne away from you. I am going to take it away from your son after you die. And so the prophet tore the cloth and gave 2 pieces of his garment that he had torn off and gave it to that king and said, you will have 2 tribes. These other 10 pieces, they are separate. You are not going to rule them. They're going to be given to your servant to rule. So there's a separation. And now out of fear that the 10 tribes, anybody going to Jerusalem would be harmed, because they were still unfaithful. Okay, it was still all pagan worship going on up in Jerusalem. These were the unfaithful, most corrupt Israelites. And the other 10 tribes, it was against divine law. They were wrong to do it. They were afraid. They let fear instead of faith and trust in our Creator make this choice. But they established another place to worship, and that's the Samaritan story. That's where they go. They observe all the same festivals, all the same days. I mean, they probably, there's fluctuation and stuff. They diverted to a certain extent because they separated and they didn't go to Jerusalem. So they were already dispersed, like doing their own thing. So when Jerusalem was conquered again, and those people were taken away, those were the most corrupt. And they were Judeans, and so that's how they became called Jews. Now, when we talk about who is settling Israel now, if you look to see, can I move to Israel? No. Number one, of course, you have to be Jewish. Number two, you cannot be a Messianic Jew. You cannot believe in Yahusha as the Messiah. No. And they will investigate it. The only Jews in Israel that are called Messianic Jews, the ones that believe that Yahusha, in fact, was the Messiah, chose to start believing that after already being there. That's how they're there. But predominantly, all the Jews in Israel are non-believing. And you have to speak Hebrew. You cannot be Jewish who doesn't speak Hebrew. You have to speak Hebrew. So basically, you have to be a devout believing Jew or a devout secular Jew, which any believing Jew will say does not exist. That they've cut the branches. They're not Jews. No. So all the people who, like Yahusha told them, oh, you're claiming these people are your ancestors, and that's why you have the right to rule and be here in Jerusalem. But your ancestors are the ones who killed the prophets, stoning them right there behind the altar in the temple. Now, how much even worse that they took the Creator's most beloved, perfect Son and killed him. And now their offspring, their descendants, are the first ones and the only ones right now allowed to resettle Israel. And the only reason the Hasidic Jews let the other Jews in, the ones that were all settled and comfortable and thriving in Arabic communities where the Muslims and the Israelites were getting along just fine, they had them pretty much forcibly brought to Israel as manual labor because none of them wanted to go out and work the fields. They took their children away from them. I mean, it's basically genocide all over again. They took their children away from them. Oh, look, you already have 7 children. We're taking the baby. And to this day, there are still people looking for their children who were taken at that time by the Hasidic Jews to raise in their own home. So these are the people occupying the Holy Land right now. And what are they doing? They're trying to build. And for those who call themselves Christians, which they can do just fine, because I'm telling you, that's just all that. They have nothing to do with the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They have nothing to do with the Messiah. These Christians who are providing the bulls to be sacrificed, knowing that the scripture says sacrifices are an abomination. They are helping them knowingly commit an abomination. And that's why the flood's not going to come to the entire world, because our Creator promised He would not take out the whole world with the flood, but Jerusalem itself will be flooded. And that's why people got to run to their rooftops and run up into the mountains when they see that object that causes desolation, the abomination that causes desolation. The abomination is an inappropriate sacrifice. And it was already defined what that sacrifice is. Any blood sacrifice made in the name of our Creator is an abomination to Him. So, I would not be in such a big hurry to go to Israel. No. And also, just because we are referred to the story of Ruth as an example of a kinsman redeemer, that does not mean, a woman like me has to go marry a Jew. No, because even Job, who was not even a Jew, prayed. He was down at his worst, and he said, I know my Redeemer is going to come and walk on the earth. And it was for any relative. If they had to sell property because they were falling on hard times, if they were gone into slavery, if they had to sell themselves into servitude, then it was up to their closest living male relative to compensate and redeem and reclaim them and restore them to comfortable living on productive land and stuff like that. So, for example, if one fell away, turned out to be a drunk, and their child is struggling, and the father, sells himself into debt, maybe dies in a drunken brawl, this child's left alone, it's up to his nearest living male relative to make sure he has the property that he inherited, a home to live in, protection, and if the property's run down, then to build up that property, make sure that it's fertile, the fields are producing, they have water to take care of themselves, everything like that. That is so incredibly beautiful. What a provision. It's like the culture I grew up in, nobody takes care of anybody. Like, when I was a young mother, my mother flat out said, I am not going to watch that baby so you can go get a job. Go on the state. Go get welfare. And people sit there and wonder how women got dependent on welfare. Like, oh, they were just all needy and no good. Like, no. It was an option, and a whole bunch of baby boomer parents who were totally spoiled and selfish because they were part of the boom. Their parents had to work. They'd build themselves a little itty bitty house, paying cash as they go. Ooh, eventually they got a refrigerator. Ooh, eventually they put on an addition so that there's a bedroom separate from the kitchen living area. And then boom, they can afford to put on another addition. Oh, eventually they can afford a car. That's the way things were. But then after that war ended and everything boomed, no, the baby boomers moved into a house with several bedrooms, had, fully furnished with appliances. That's expected to come with a house, man. And a car, of course they had a car. They had cars as teenagers. Why wouldn't they have a car? And they were spoiled. They were selfish to some extent. They went to work. Latchkey kids. You see Gen X bragging. Yeah, we were. Gen X was made of grit and fire because our parents, the boomers, were selfish and neglectful. They had to have a TV announcement 10 o'clock every night. Do you know where your child is? What does that tell you? The public announcement every night before the really bad stuff started playing on TV. There's certain hours, once kids' bedtime hit, then, they'd put on the more gnarly stuff on public TV. So it was, do you know where your children are? Because we know y'all are high, drunk, preparing to be entertained by something kids shouldn't be watching. Are your kids taken care of? Are they, home in bed where they're supposed to be? Now that we've got your full attention and we're going to corrupt you in some demonic playground stuff, like, so yeah, I'm just the whole culture that people look after one another. I always really wished that I had, like, that I had a grandmother's whose house was just a place where anybody can go and stay for a time if they needed it, to recuperate from traumas of life. And grandmothers, the cliche grandmother, like, oh, eat, who's always cooking food for you, making sure that you're taken care of and taking care of yourself. And families that look out for one another's children, like the able-bodied can go to work. And there are even people, like, this is why foreigners take over the United States and leave white people behind, because water. There are families where if one can't afford a Maserati in their family, if everybody can't afford one, then even if you have the money for one, you can't, you're not allowed to have one. Where the whole family, no matter, regardless of age and gender, lives under one roof until that house is paid off. And then they all put in to the next house, and whoever's going to move into that house. That's real. People do this stuff. And look at our mainstream white culture. Oh, no. You're 18. You're an adult now. You need to go. And then there are kids who stay at home and they don't financially contribute. They got the newest, video games and technology and, their own cars. They go out on dates. Like, there's a prospective mate for you, You don't look for a mate that you can Netflix and chill with. You look for somebody who you can make major life decisions with. And that's where not having a lot of community intertwined involvement causes us to make really bad decisions, because we just take the word. Oh, he's got cool friends. He's got a good job today. Oh, but if you've seen him in the community otherwise, yeah, he's only had that job for 5 minutes and he's gotten fired from every other job he's had. You have no future with him. You're going to be supporting his butt. And one who's, living in mom's basement and not helping her, like, no, that's not good. And I mean, there are those who, we're 18. My mother said, I turned 18. My mother moved, sold the house, and didn't even tell me. Like, once their responsibility is over with, you're out, you're gone. And so there are a lot of people who can't afford to live, and you see a lot of people living in vans and tiny houses and on park benches, and of course they turn to drugs and alcohol. They were probably on Ritalin when they were growing up, but they can't afford it now. Can't afford the insurance, whatever. So heroin is a substitute. That's what they do. They've told me when I've met them and I've asked them, like, why that? And yeah, that's why. And so yeah, what a beautiful arrangement. And that somebody who did not legally qualify for it, like Ruth, was not just covered by it, but became part of the line through which the Messiah came. Like, that's incredible. That's beautiful. So, hopefully you got something out of this.